I used to believe humiliation was something you could prepare for, like a speech or a test, that if you held your chin high enough, it couldn't reach you. I learned that night how wrong I was. The ballroom at Fort Ridge was glowing. Golden chandeliers, champagne glasses, laughter that echoed too loud. My fiancé, Captain Ethan Ward, was the man everyone admired. Perfect uniform, perfect smile, perfect future. And for months, I'd convinced myself I belonged next to him. The night was meant to honor his promotion. Everyone was there. His unit, their wives, even the base commander. I had spent the entire week helping him plan the event. Every detail from the seating chart to the floral centerpieces. It was supposed to be his moment. I didn't know it would become mine. Just not the kind anyone dreams of. Halfway through the dinner, someone tapped a glass. Ethan stood, his arms slipping around my shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong, confident, the kind of voice that could make even an order sound like a promise. "Before we toast, I'd like to introduce someone very special." The crowd quieted. Every eye turned to me. "This," he said, tightening his arm just enough to make me feel it, "is my fiancée Claire." Applause, smiles, cameras flashing. I smiled too, that polite, practiced smile that hides nerves behind teeth. "But," he continued, "what you don't know is how we met." I felt my stomach drop. "That wasn't part of the plan." Ethan grinned, pausing for dramatic effect. "See, Claire was volunteering at a medical clinic near the base. And when I first saw her, she was..." He laughed, turning to the crowd, covered in mud, trying to fix a truck she had no idea how to fix. "I thought she was a mechanic, not a nurse." Laughter rippled through the room. I tried to laugh too. He wasn't finished. "And she was so nervous back then," he went on. "Didn't even know how to talk to officers. She'd salute waiters if they wore too much black." More laughter. Louder this time. I felt the heat creep up my neck. I wanted to disappear. He poured another glass of champagne, the spotlight catching his medals. But somehow I saw potential. He said, "And look at her now. Cleaned up, classy, ready to be an officer's wife." The laughter this time felt sharper, like glass breaking inside my chest. I froze, smiling through it, because that's what you do when you're the punchline. Across the room, I noticed the general, an older man with silver hair and a stare that could silence a storm. He wasn't laughing. He was just watching me. Ethan raised his glass high. "To Claire, for proving even a civilian can be trained." That was the moment I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, inside, where pride goes to die. I put down my napkin and stood, my chair scraping against the marble floor. "Excuse me," I said softly. Ethan blinked. "Hey, where are you?" But I was already walking. The laughter behind me turned into whispers. Someone said, "Is she crying?" I wasn't. Not yet. I pushed through the ballroom doors and stepped into the cold night air. The music and laughter faded, replaced by the hum of distant engines from the airfield. The stars above looked indifferent, silent witnesses. I wanted to scream, to rip the heels off my feet, to ask myself how I ended up being mocked by the man who once said I was his pride. But all I did was stand there, clutching the edge of my shawl, like a uniform I never earned. Behind me, the doors opened. I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate. I turned, expecting Ethan. It wasn't him. It was the general. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, really looked at me, the way no one in that room had. "Miss," he said finally, voice low, steady. "That man doesn't deserve the story you carry." I frowned. "Excuse me," he nodded once, as if confirming something only he knew. "One day, you'll understand." And then he walked back inside, leaving me standing there with a confusion that burned hotter than my humiliation. I didn't know what he meant, not yet. All I knew was that something had shifted. A truth that had been hiding in my past was about to step out into the light, but for that moment, I stood alone, shaking, the laughter from the ballroom echoing faintly through the doors. That was the night I learned humiliation doesn't end when the room goes quiet. It follows you home until you face what it came to teach you. Before the uniform, before the ballroom, before Ethan, there was the desert and the sound of rotor blades cutting through dust and blood. I was 23 when I first stepped onto that foreign soil. Technically, I wasn't a soldier. I was a civilian medic, part of a humanitarian rescue team, contracted by the military for a classified operation. Our job was simple: keep people alive while everyone else figured out how to end the fighting. It was supposed to be temporary, 6 months, but nothing about that place or what happened there was temporary. We were stationed near the border of a war zone that didn't officially exist. The base was small, crude, mostly tents and sandbags. The nights were long, the air dry enough to burn your throat. We slept to the hum of generators and woke to the distant thunder of artillery. There was one night that rewired my life. The night our convoy was ambushed. We'd been transporting injured soldiers from a nearby forward post. The attack came fast, fire in the dark, explosions tearing through silence. I remember the deafening noise, the smell of diesel and burning cloth. When it was over, half our team was down. The radio was dead, and somewhere beyond the smoke, a voice kept screaming, "We've got men trapped!" I ran toward the sound. My boots slipped in the sand, my hands already shaking from adrenaline. I found 3 soldiers pinned under the wreckage of a truck. The metal twisted like a cage. One of them, a man with a deep gash across his temple, was trying to lift the beam trapping the others. I grabbed his shoulder. "Stop! You'll make it worse!" He looked at me, eyes wild, desperate. "They'll burn if we don't move it." That was the first time I saw him, General Robert Kane. Only then, he wasn't a general, just a captain with blood on his face and a death wish in his eyes. We worked together for hours, cutting through metal, stabilizing the wounded, carrying bodies through fire. I lost count of how many times I thought I'd die there, but we didn't, because we didn't stop. By dawn, we had dragged every survivor to safety. 21 men lived because of that night. When the extraction team arrived, they took names, statements, everything. Then they told me something I'll never forget. "Everything that happened here stays classified. You are never here. You understand?" I nodded, because I had no choice. The operation was buried in paperwork and red tape. The soldiers involved were reassigned, promoted, or retired. I returned home with scars on my hands and nightmares I didn't tell anyone about. No medals, no thank you ceremony, just silence. I tried to build a normal life after that. Got a job at a base clinic. Told people I'd worked in overseas aid, nothing more. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining why sudden noises made me flinch, or why I couldn't stand the smell of diesel. That's where I met Ethan. He was charming. The kind of man who wore confidence like armor. He said I had a calmness that felt safe. I almost laughed. Calmness. That's what trauma looks like when you hide it well. At first, he made me feel seen, wanted. But as time passed, I realized he wasn't seeing me, just the version that fit his world. The soft, silent fiancé who smiled for photos and stayed out of military talk. He once asked about the faint scars on my wrist. I told him they were from a clinic accident. He didn't ask. Again, I sometimes wondered if he would have respected me more if he knew who I'd really been. The woman who pulled soldiers out of fire while he was still learning to salute. But the truth was locked away, along with every report, every name, every memory stamped, classified. So when he mocked me at that dinner, when he turned me into a joke, he didn't just humiliate me. He erased the part of me that had already sacrificed everything for men like him. And yet, the look the general gave me that night, it haunted me. Because if he was the same man I'd saved all those years ago, then my secret wasn't as buried as I thought. I didn't know it yet, but the past I'd buried in sand was about to rise again. And this time, it would stand tall in a full dress uniform. After that night in the ballroom, I sat in my car for nearly an hour before driving home. The mascara had already streaked down my cheeks, but I didn't care anymore. The air smelled of exhaust and rain, a scent that always reminded me of the base camps overseas. Back then, rain meant mercy. Tonight, it felt like judgment. When I finally looked at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see a fiancé. I saw a soldier, unarmed, ununiformed, and utterly defeated. But here's the thing about humiliation. Once it breaks you, it also shows you who you've become. In the weeks that followed, Ethan acted like nothing had happened. He texted me the next morning. "You were so tense last night. You need to learn to laugh at yourself, babe." Laugh at myself. That was his version of love. Tolerance disguised as affection. We still had an engagement party to plan. His family, his friends, his commanding officers. I smiled through every brunch, every photo shoot, every floral arrangement. It was like preparing for a mission, one where the goal wasn't survival, but silence. Ethan had this way of making everything sound like an order cloaked in a compliment. Wear that blue dress, the one that makes you look more polished. Don't talk about the clinic stuff. They wouldn't understand. Just stand beside me when the general arrives, okay? You look good in the background. I didn't argue anymore. Not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to fight battles that didn't matter. Some wars aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with words that strip you down piece by piece. Every time I smiled for him, I felt a little less like myself. He started introducing me as his future wife, never as Claire. He corrected my posture, my tone, my laughter, as if I were being trained to fit into a role I never auditioned for. It was an engagement, but it felt like enlistment. Rules, obedience, appearance, and underneath it all, silence. One afternoon, I was at his apartment when a letter arrived. It was addressed to him but stamped with a military seal. Headquarters of the Joint Command. He tore it open and frowned. "General Kane requested a private meeting with me," he muttered. "Weird. Probably about my promotion paperwork." The name hit me like a pulse.Kane. The man who'd looked at me that night. The man whose eyes had carried something like recognition. Ethan didn't notice the color drain from my face. He was too busy checking his reflection in the mirror. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I tried to pretend it didn't matter, but deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something. A reckoning, maybe. That weekend, we went to a family barbecue at his parents' house. The air smelled like charcoal and arrogance. His mother fussed over him, calling him her golden boy. His father slapped his back like he was already a hero. At one point, his cousin asked, "So, Claire, do you work?" I smiled politely. "I'm a medical volunteer." Ethan cut me off. "She used to. Now she just helps with my schedules." I froze. The way he said it, like I was an accessory. His cousin laughed. "A real team player, huh?" Everyone chuckled. Everyone except me. I excused myself and walked to the edge of the yard, staring at the flag, waving lazily in the afternoon sun. I remembered the day I'd patched up a wounded soldier, while bullets tore through the sandbags beside me. And now, here I was, shrinking under words instead of gunfire. It hit me then. I hadn't left the battlefield. I'd just changed uniforms. That night, when Ethan dropped me home, he leaned in to kiss me. I turned my head slightly, letting it land on my cheek. He pulled back, annoyed. You're distant lately. Maybe I'm tired, I said. Then rest, he replied flatly. You'll need your energy. The general's dinner is next month. Big night. Don't embarrass me again. And just like that, the mask slipped. There it was, the command beneath the charm. After he drove off, I went inside, locked the door, and finally let the tears fall. Not because I'd lost him, but because I realized I was already gone. I wasn't the woman who ran into burning wreckage to save lives anymore. I'd become the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace, but that was about to change because the man he was so eager to impress, General Kane, knew exactly who I was, and soon the world Ethan built on arrogance and ignorance was going to crumble beneath one simple gesture. Salute. The day Ethan met General Robert Kane was supposed to be the highlight of his career. He spent an hour ironing his uniform, adjusting every ribbon, polishing every medal like he was preparing for a coronation. I stood in the doorway, watching him rehearse his salute in the mirror. Do I look commanding enough? He asked. You look prepared, I said quietly. He didn't catch the hesitation in my tone. He rarely did anymore. The meeting was scheduled for 0900 hours at the base headquarters. Ethan insisted I come with him, said it would look good, to show he had a supportive fiancé. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see the general again. Something about that man haunted me. His eyes at the banquet, his words. That man doesn't deserve the story you carry. I didn't even know what he meant at the time, but I was about to find out. We arrived early. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, the hum of air conditioning filling the silence. I sat perfectly still, while Ethan rehearsed his talking points, his ego too loud for the quiet around us. The secretary called us in. The general's office was large but simple. Commendations lined the walls, framed photos of deployments and soldiers. Men who'd fought, bled, survived. The air felt heavy with memory. General Kane stood behind his desk, reading a file. When he finally looked up, his gaze landed on me first. And in that single moment, I saw it. Recognition. The kind that runs deeper than memory. He nodded once. Captain Ward, Ethan snapped to attention. Sir. And Miss, the general's eyes held mine. Claire, wasn't it? Yes, sir. My voice came out softer than I expected. He studied me for a beat too long. Then, turning to Ethan, he said, Please have a seat. We sat. Ethan leaned forward, eager. Sir, I heard you wanted to discuss my upcoming transfer. That can wait, Kane interrupted. His tone was calm, but his authority filled the room. Before that, I wanted to address something else. He opened a folder. My stomach dropped when I saw the red stripe across the top. Classified. Ethan noticed it too, leaning in. Sir, is this about the new intel assignment? The general ignored him. His eyes stayed on me. Claire, do you recognize this document? My throat went dry. I did. I recognized every word, every line. It was the incident report from that night. The ambush, the rescue, the lives saved. Ethan looked between us, confused. What's going on? General Kane closed the file gently. Years ago, during an unrecorded rescue operation near the Alamara border, 21 soldiers were trapped after an explosion. A civilian medic refused evacuation orders and stayed behind to save them. He paused. That medic was Claire. The room went still. I could hear the faint tick of the clock, the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Ethan blinked, almost laughing. Wait, her? That's impossible. She was never enlisted. She wasn't, Kane said evenly. But she was the reason I'm standing here today. Ethan's jaw tightened. Why would you bring that up now? Because, the general said, his gaze firm. I heard how you spoke to her at that banquet, and I will not let a man under my command demeans someone who's shown more courage without a rank than most do with one. Ethan tried to protest, but Cain raised a hand. Enough! He walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of me. You probably don't remember much about that night, Claire, but I do. You dragged me out of a burning vehicle when I was barely conscious. You wrapped my shoulder with your own shirt and kept me alive until the choppers arrived. His voice softened. You saved my men, my command, my life. My hands trembled. For years, that memory had lived like a ghost in my mind. Something buried under silence and classified ink. To hear it spoken aloud, in that office, by the man who lived it, it shattered something inside me. Cain turned back to Ethan. You wanted to impress me with your discipline, your ambition, but I'm more impressed by humility and by honor, 2 things you seem to lack. Ethan's face went pale. Sir, I didn't know. That's the point. Cain cut in. You didn't care to. The silence that followed was the kind that weighs more than words. Finally, the general faced me again. Miss Claire, I owe you a debt I can't repay, but I can make sure your courage isn't forgotten. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out, just tears. Quiet, uninvited, unstoppable. He handed me something. A small silver insignia. We never had the chance to honor you properly. Consider this long overdue. Ethan sat frozen, his mouth half open, pride collapsing into something hollow. The general walked back to his desk. That will be all, Captain Ward. You're dismissed. Ethan stood slowly, stunned. I followed, clutching the insignia in my hand. Just as we reached the door, the general spoke again, his voice steady, deliberate. Oh, and Captain, next time you want to make a toast, make sure it's to someone who's actually earned it. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Outside, the morning sun was blinding. The insignia felt warm in my palm, like it had been waiting years to find its way back to me. And as Ethan stormed ahead, his ego in shambles, I walked slower, lighter, because for the first time in years, someone had stood up for me, not out of pity, but out of truth. Word travels fast in a base, faster than orders, faster than truth. By noon, everyone had heard about the salute. They said General Cain stood for a civilian, something almost unheard of. Some whispered it was respect. Others said it was pity. But for the first time, the story wasn't about Ethan Ward, rising star of the 12th Battalion. It was about the woman who'd stood beside him, and the man who'd stood for her. That woman was me. The day after the meeting, the general invited us to attend a ceremony at the training grounds. For morale, he'd said. Ethan didn't want to go. His pride was still bleeding. But orders were orders, so we went. Rows of soldiers stood in formation, sunlight glinting off their badges. The wind carried the faint smell of dust and gun oil. The general stood at the podium, a quiet authority radiating from him. Ethan and I took our seats in the front row. I could feel eyes on us. Curious, calculating. The base was a small world, and gossip was its currency. Cain began to speak. Today, he said, we gather not to celebrate rank or position, but honor. The word hit differently this time. It wasn't a slogan. It was something heavier, truer. He spoke of duty, of courage that lives beyond command. He told the story of a rescue that never made it into the records, of a civilian who refused to leave wounded soldiers behind in a burning field. My chest tightened. He didn't say my name, but every word was mine. She wasn't trained for war, he said, voice steady. But she carried the wounded through fire. She didn't wear the uniform, but she lived its code. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the chair. My palms were damp, my heartbeat deafening. Ethan sat rigid beside me, his face unreadable. Then, Kane stepped away from the podium. He walked straight toward the audience, straight toward me. The crowd went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. When he stopped in front of me, I instinctively stood. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at me, not like a superior looking at a subordinate, but like a soldier looking at another soldier. Then, slowly, deliberately, General Robert Kane raised his hand, and he saluted me. The crowd gasped. The soldiers, the officers, even Ethan, all frozen, because this wasn't just a gesture. It was a declaration. He held the salute, steady and unshaken. For valor, he said softly. For honor without rank. My throat closed. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. Somewhere behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs. Soldiers standing, one by one, then 2, then 10, then the entire front row rose, following their general's lead. Dozens of hands lifted in unison. Dozens of eyes watched me. Not with pity, not with gossip, but with something else. Respect. I felt my knees weaken. My hands trembled. For years I'd hidden that night behind silence and shame, believing that my courage was something to forget, not remember. And now here it was, remembered by everyone. Ethan stood too, but not to join them. He looked lost, like the ground had been pulled from beneath him. His fiancée, the woman he'd mocked for being ordinary, was now being saluted by the man he idolized. When the salute ended, the field stayed quiet. Then someone started clapping. Hesitant at first, then stronger. Within seconds, the sound filled the air. I could feel tears spilling down my cheeks. Not from pride, from release. General Kane lowered his hand and leaned close enough for only me to hear. You carried us through fire, Claire. It's time someone carried your story. I whispered back, voice shaking. I never wanted recognition, sir. He smiled faintly. That's what makes you deserving of it. When the ceremony ended, Ethan didn't wait. He turned and walked away before anyone could speak to him. The applause still echoed as his figure grew smaller in the distance. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't chase after him, because in that moment, I realized I didn't need his validation. I never did. The man who had once mocked me in front of everyone was now invisible, and the man who saw my worth had made sure everyone else saw it too. As the crowd dispersed, a young soldier approached me. Couldn't have been more than 20. His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Ma'am," he said, "if you don't mind me asking, were you really there that night?" I nodded. He straightened his posture and said, "Then it's an honor to meet you, ma'am." Something in me broke and mended all at once. When I left the field that day, I carried nothing in my hands. No medals, no trophies. But I carried something more powerful. A name that no longer needed defending. And as I reached the gates, I heard one last echo behind me. The general's voice calling out, once a soldier in spirit, always a soldier in soul. That's when I finally understood. Honor isn't given by rank. It's revealed by truth. After the ceremony, Ethan's silence was deafening. He didn't speak to me on the drive home. Not a word. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rasp of his breath. Sharp, uneven, like he was chewing on his pride. I watched the world blur past the window, the base, the flags, the men who'd stood and saluted me, fading into the distance, like a memory I still wasn't sure I believed. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You must be thrilled," he said, voice low, biting. "All eyes on you. You got your standing ovation." I turned toward him. "That wasn't for me, Ethan. That was for what happened. For what happened years ago." He cut in. "And somehow, you managed to turn my moment into yours." I blinked, stunned. Your moment. He slammed the steering wheel. Do you even know what that looked like? My commanding officer saluting my fiancé. Like I'm some footnote in your hero story. I stared at him. The anger in his tone laced with something smaller. Fear. This isn't about rank, Ethan. That's easy for you to say, he snapped. You don't have a career to lose. I didn't reply. There was no point. The man beside me wasn't the one I thought I'd loved. He was a shadow of his own ego, unraveling the moment someone else's truth outshone his image. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. For a long while, we sat in silence. Then quietly, he said, "You embarrassed me." That was the last straw. Embarrassed you, I repeated, my voice shaking. Ethan, you humiliated me. In front of our friends, in front of your peers, in front of yourself, and I still stood by you. I still showed up for you. But the moment someone else stood for me, you can't handle it. He didn't answer, just stared ahead, jaw clenched, eyes burning with wounded pride. I opened the door. You're not losing your rank, Ethan. You're losing your reflection. And that's not my fault. When I stepped out, he didn't stop me. He didn't even look up. That week, rumors spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about the salute, about Captain Ward's fiancé, the civilian medic hero. Some admired him for standing beside me. Others pitied him for being overshadowed by someone without a uniform. He started avoiding the base mess hall, skipping briefings, ignoring calls. When he finally did show up, the confidence he wore like armor had vanished. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the kitchen, staring at a letter. The military seal on the envelope made my stomach twist. Orders? I asked gently. He didn't look up. Reassignment. To where? He folded the paper and shoved it aside. Doesn't matter. It's a desk job. Public relations. He laughed. But it wasn't really a laugh. More like a sound made by someone who just realized his dream had been quietly dismantled. General Kane didn't do this to you, I said softly. You did this to yourself. He looked at me then. Really looked. You think I don't know that? And for the first time, I saw it. The crack in his pride. The boy underneath the uniform, scared and small. I worked my whole life to be someone people respected, he whispered. And now they respect you. I stepped closer, my anger dissolving into something sadder. Ethan, respect isn't taken from you. It's earned, and it's shared. He didn't respond, just stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked past me. That night, he didn't come home. Days passed. The reassignment became official. Ethan Ward, once the golden captain, had fallen quietly into administrative shadows. The whispers around the base turned from gossip to sympathy. One afternoon, I went to return the insignia the general had given me. It didn't feel right to keep it. When I entered his office, he looked up, a faint smile in his eyes. You don't need to return that, he said, before I could speak. I didn't earn it, I replied. He stood, walking around the desk. You think valor is about medals, Claire. It's not. It's about standing when you're most afraid. You did that, twice. I shook my head. Ethan, he's not taking it well. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Kane's gaze softened. The truth doesn't ruin people, Claire. It reveals them. You didn't destroy Ethan. You showed him who he really was. The words landed heavy, because deep down, I knew he was right. A week later, I got a call. Ethan wanted to meet. He was waiting at the same cafe where he'd proposed. The place that once smelled like hope and coffee and sunlight. When I walked in, he looked smaller, not physically but in spirit. His uniform was pressed, but his posture wasn't. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said quietly. For the banquet, for the things I said, I sat across from him. And for what you didn't say, he nodded. That too. There was no anger left between us, just exhaustion. The kind that comes when love and pride both run out. I thought marrying you would make me stronger, he said. But I think I needed to be strong before I deserved you. My throat tightened. You don't have to deserve me, Ethan. You just had to see me. He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. That's what I'm learning now. When we said goodbye, it wasn't dramatic. No tears, no final kiss. Just two people who finally understood that love built on pride can't survive truth. As I walked away, I heard him call out softly, "Claire?" I turned. "Thank you," he said, for standing taller than I ever could. The next morning, his car was gone from the driveway. A small envelope sat on my porch. My engagement ring inside, along with a single note. You deserve someone who salutes you first. That's when I realized. His fall wasn't punishment. It was transformation. And maybe, just maybe, it was the only way either of us could stand again. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than grief. The day after Ethan left, my house was so quiet that even my heartbeat sounded like an echo. The engagement ring sat on the kitchen counter. A small circle of silver that once promised forever. Now just a mirror reflecting all the things we never became. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't love him, but because somewhere deep down, I already had. I had mourned the version of him that existed, before pride took over, before love turned into performance, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small anymore. A few weeks passed. The world moved on. The bass returned to routine. The whispers faded. Life became ordinary again, except for one small detail. Every time I walked near the gates, soldiers would nod slightly, their eyes holding quiet recognition. Not fame, not pity, respect. I started volunteering again, this time at the rehabilitation unit. The smell of antiseptic and coffee felt familiar, comforting even. There, I found peace in helping others rebuild what war had taken from them. One afternoon, as I was finishing a session, a young soldier handed me an envelope. "From General Kane," he said. Inside was a simple note, handwritten in careful script. "For courage unspoken and wounds unseen, your story reminds us that honor doesn't wear a name tag." Beneath it was a request. "Please attend tomorrow's ceremony." I almost didn't go, but something in those words, "Honor doesn't wear a name tag," pulled me there. The ceremony was smaller this time. Fewer cameras, fewer decorations, just soldiers, their families, and a faint golden light spilling through the clouds. When I arrived, General Kane greeted me with a calm smile. "I'm glad you came, Claire. I wasn't sure I should," I admitted. "You've earned this moment more than anyone here." Before I could reply, he stepped up to the podium and began to speak. Not about rank or duty, but about humility, about the courage to stand even when no one's watching. Then he said my name, and my heart stopped. "Claire Bennett," he announced, "on behalf of every soldier whose life was touched by your courage, and every officer who has learned from your grace, we honor you today." He motioned for me to come forward. My legs trembled as I walked to the stage. The crowd blurred into a soft sea of faces. I wasn't wearing a uniform, just a simple blue dress. But as I reached the front, I saw it. Every soldier standing, hands raised in salute. 100 salutes, and this time, I didn't look away. Kane handed me a small wooden box. "Inside," he said, "is not a medal. It's a reminder that you don't have to wear the uniform to embody what it stands for." I opened it. Inside was a single silver insignia, the same one he'd given me weeks ago, but now engraved with words that caught in my breath. "For honor without rank." The applause that followed didn't sound like noise this time. It sounded like release, like every buried version of myself, finally exhaling after years of silence. And then, Amid the crowd, I saw him, Ethan. He wasn't in uniform, just a white shirt, hands in his pockets, standing near the back. Our eyes met. No anger, no regret, just a quiet, shared understanding that we'd both walk through fire and come out human. When the ceremony ended, he approached me. "Looks good on you," he said, nodding toward the insignia. I smiled softly. "So does humility." He laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh that sounded like closure. We didn't need words after that. He saluted me once, a small private gesture, almost hidden from the crowd, and then turned to leave. And that was the last time I saw him. I still keep the insignia on my desk. Some days, I run my fingers over the engraving and remember how far I've come. From the woman who once shrank in the shadow of someone else's pride, to the one who finally stood in the light of her own truth. That day, when 100 soldiers saluted me, I realized something profound. It wasn't the salute that freed me. It was finally believing I deserved it. Because honor isn't about who stands for you. It's about learning to stand for yourself.